adverse effects of treatment and the probable and actual outcome. It may seem an unlikely way for staff from a major hospital to act, but unfortunately it's true, and I know it's quite common. Such morally unacceptable conduct needs to be fully exposed to the public and to the authorities, whoever the authorities are. I mean, I've been to them. They don't seem to be there. There's an author called Robin Cook, some people might know. He writes medical horror stories. If he'd written a book about what happened to Don, the torment he enjoyed, he would not have been able to match the reality of what happened inside the chaos and the grime of that hospital. Nobody would consider it credible. People don't believe it can be that bad. Most can only take in the little bits and pieces you take, as if it might happen over 1 or 2 days. What happened for 1 or 2 days to some people happened to Don every day, basically for 5 weeks. And the people who visited him, Chris and Melissa and Alison, and my sister Veronica and Carmel, they can back me up on that one. In Cook's horror novels, there are always 1 or 2 villains, deranged nurses, or whatever. But what caused Don's death was no aberration of humanity, no psychopathic doctor or demented nurse. The fact is, Don wasn't brutalised and killed by evil dark forces. His suffering was caused by ordinary doctors and nurses, most of whom I would not recognise again. One reason I wouldn't was not one person in that hospital had a name tag on. So you never knew who you were talking to, and over 5 weeks you just lost track of people. They all became like a blur. No doubt most of them go home at the end of the day and have no idea what their lack of compassion, cleanliness and lack of responsibility mean to vulnerable patients like Don. This attitude carries right through to the New South Wales Healthcare Complaints Commission, which almost always absolves the medical practitioners, and on to the New South Wales Health Department, the New South Wales Labor Government's Health Minister and the Premier. I've written reams of letters to these people and no joy. No one can ever be pinned down, no one is accountable, no one is ever responsible. This is becoming hospital culture in New South Wales, and it chills me to the bone. I make no apologies for my criticism of the Healthcare Complaints Commission, who have failed yet to give fair and unbiased service to our small family and the people in New South Wales. I believe they are the biggest part of the problem. I should not have to be chasing justice on behalf of my dead husband and my 2 daughters. I have exhausted every single investigative avenue inside New South Wales, jumped through all their hoops, found up 3 hard, sad and lonely years of struggle that the system is designed solely to deplete your energy and not to achieve justice and change. Therefore, that system must be changed. I now give Don's awful story to you. Please make the best use of it. Hopefully something good will come out of it. The system just cannot go on like this. There's not a one of us that's immune to what happened to him. Okay, thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Therese. It is eerie, isn't it, that we are actually in the building that a lot of those incorrect decisions were made. Our next speaker is the right man for the job. In 1970, he was awarded the Australian Outstanding Man of the Year. 28 years later, he was told he was a national living treasure. And in 1999, he was awarded an AO for service to the community by raising public awareness of social issues as an advocate for social change. He is known as the man responsible for honesty in politics, and the name John Hatton strikes fear in the minds of many people, but he has been a wonderful support to our author here today. Would you please make Mr. John Hatton very, very welcome.
It is emotional for me today because anybody that reads that book cannot but shed a tear. I have anger that drives me. It's a controlled anger because I see so many things that I want to change. What amazes me in the many battles I've had in exposing corruption in a number of departments and in the police service and in the judiciary and in the hospital system is that the system keeps going on. For example, in Chelmsford on the North Shore, there were, if I remember rightly, 26 patients died under a Dr. Bailey, kept in sedation for weeks on end. And when I faced them in the theaterette here at Parliament House, I was in tears. That was under a Liberal government. Also under a Liberal government, I was approached by a medical specialist at RPA. The story he told me I couldn't believe. There were dice being played with heart patients from all over New South Wales. They were defecating in the showers and urinating in the hand basins because they didn't even have toilets. This is RPA. And they shuffled the patients from the most urgent to the very urgent to the critical. And I came across that because a former prisoner of war in Japan, one of my constituents, died in that lottery. And now we have this horrendous story of a man who was tortured to death by the system. Why is that so, is the question in my mind. What is it about the system that we can change? So let's look at the system. If this were a car factory in Japan, you'd have quality control. You'd have people who were personally responsible for their actions. Hospitals are a business, but they don't even adopt business practice. Good management practice, quality control, staff supervision. They fail time and time again. One of the reasons is that the number of medical administrators in New South Wales has continued to plummet. The result is a dreadful demise in the ability to assess the quality of care. So this book is an analysis of that failure and the torture of a quadriplegic patient in Royal North Shore Hospital. In many hospitals, medical administrators, the key people, the quality control people, the people on which your life depends, are paid less than doctors in a clinical role, emergency doctors, or doctors and nurses in other roles. Their holiday loading and their pay in total is less. These are the people who are responsible for supervision of the quality of care. And so they're leaving the system in droves. Yet they're faced with higher stress levels if they do the job properly. So what about those who choose to remain? Now they're either very dedicated people who suffer a lot of stress and try to do their best, or more often than not, they're people who are cowed by the system. Because the thing that's happening in New South Wales hospitals is bullying. The level of bullying is quite frightening. And medicos will not put up with that if they've got any spine or if they've got any sense of responsibility to the job that they have to do. And neither will nurses. And so consequently you get a crisis. And what's at the top of that crisis is because the system means that CEOs, whether in the RTA or the medical area or any other area, can be sacked immediately, without notice, without reason. They are under political control. They are political animals. They will give the minister the advice that the minister wants, not the advice the minister needs. You do not get clinical advice. You do not get professionalism. You get people who are cowed by the system and who are prepared to bully those beneath them in order to ensure their survival in a system where they have no rights because of the method of appointment. Scientific clinical assessment followed by empathetic treatment with thorough independent assessment by competent, trained, caring managers is vital. And this was what was lacking here, and this is what is lacking in many state hospitals. He did not get evidence-based, scientific, critical assessment. Don Mackay did not get empathetic treatment. what he got was mind-boggling torture. So we have in the system a lack of leadership and courage to stand up to the bullying which is rife. We have a lack of incentive by means of proper pay and conditions for nurses and doctors in that supervisory role. And this, of course, will guarantee that what happened to Donald Mackay will happen again. But I'll tell you what else we don't have. We don't have politicians who have got the guts to stand up and say under privilege what has got to be said, what has got to be exposed, and to take on the powerful forces that allow this to continue. I want to express my admiration for the Mackay family, for Don, the late Don, and the family. There are people in the many areas where I've had some tough battles. My wife and I have lived in a safe house on occasion because we've taken on very powerful forces. There are people who, when you touch their hand, there is the electricity of people who are saying, we're not going to cop it. We're going to fight it. We're going to expose it. That's what you've got in the Mackay family, and I congratulate them.
Honesty in politics. Seems like a contradiction in terms. Thank you, John Hatton, for that. Amazing. Imagine, just take a second and think that if all politicians were like him, what a wonderful world it would be. Thank you for that. That was very powerful. All right. I expressed before to this author that we have another brick in the wall, and this is a book that was launched in February. On its 5th printing, it has been distributed all around the world, and with these two books now together, we are forming a very strong advocacy. And our author has graciously asked Eve, the author of this book here today, to speak to us about her experiences. Please make Eve Hillary very, very welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a great honour. Thank you for inviting me. And it's a great honour to be here in New South Wales Parliament House today. Don and Therese Mackay cared about people. In the 1980s, they had a young family. They were very community minded. And they didn't mind speaking the truth and risking their necks to speak the truth to help the community. They could have had a very ordinary life and a wonderful life, but in 1982 Don had an accident and became a quadriplegic, and in doing that their lives changed enormously. Theresa became a carer, and Don grappled with his extreme disability. But after a while, Don resumed being a husband, and Theresa resumed being a wife, and together they resumed caring for not only their family and each other, whose relationship had deepened by then, but caring still for their community, for the people who were suffering, for social justice. After a lifetime of contributions that this couple had made at their own expense, in 2007, Don had a problem with his lungs. Not a terribly serious problem, it was one that I know could have been resolved relatively easily. And it was time for the community and the system to repay their kindness. But unfortunately, when Don entered the public hospital system to have the problem fixed, he encountered nothing but, frankly, torture. And it was that system that was to claim his life in a very tragic way and end his life prematurely. 2 months ago, Therese Mackay very kindly sent me her manuscript to her book about Don without due care. I read it over a weekend, and I grieved for her and for Don and for their 2 daughters. But also I cried because my worst nightmare had come true. You see, I've been a healthcare professional for 40 years, and I'm also an author, and I've tracked the healthcare system here in New South Wales and written extensively about it. But it reminded me of where I had worked, where Don was, where the Mackay family spent 5 tragic weeks, where the wards and the corridors where I worked, the intensive care units on the 6th floor of that hospital where I worked during the mid-1990s. Now I can tell you I started in the hospital system in 1969. In those days it was a public system. The bottom line was getting people well. The bottom line was not profit, because it was part of the public purse. And if I may say so, the system did have its flaws. But generally speaking, we did some pretty compassionate things. And generally the culture in the system was one of striving for compassion. We had a code of ethics, and we had to live up to it. But back in the 1990s, something happened to the system. It became privatized. When I worked at that hospital where Don was, there was no private wing at that time.